then we will start, and we're on section 104, and we're at Baylor Mott. Where else? 1932. Mahapurushji Maharaj had hardly any sleep in those days. He was all the time merged in bliss in one or the other various divine moods. From his talks with numberless devotees and inmates of the monastery who visited him during the daytime, one could get an inkling of the blissful state that he was in. At times, he talked of such high states of realization that most people failed to grasp their meaning. This state became more manifest at night. He would then sometimes sing religious songs in a very low tone. At other times, he would intone verses from the Upanishads, the Gita, the Chandi, or the Bhagavata. Often enough, he would suddenly stop in the midst of his chanting and sit silently, absorbed in his own mood. Very often, he would become unaware of the outer world and his surroundings. One night, he sat on the bed with his eyes shut. It was about 2 o'clock. The whole monastery was perfectly silent. After long meditation in this way, he intoned softly from the Gita, 2 verses beginning with Apuryamanam Achala Pratishtam, etc. Then he asked the attendant, "Do you know the meaning of these?" The attendant kept silent. So he said, "Just as the sea, always full and steady, remains undisturbed by the entry of water from the waves, etc. Similarly, although thoughts of desirable things may rise as a result of past tendencies in a person of realization, still, his mind is not disturbed at all, just like the full, unagitated sea. Having realized the absolute state of peace, he remains contented in the self. But people running after enjoyment can never attain peace. True peace comes to one who has renounced all kinds of desire, becomes passionless, egoless, and devoid of the idea of possession." That's the idea, is that you have various rivers and tributaries running into the ocean, but the ocean's undisturbed by it. Similarly, you could be a fully realized soul, and you see these desires coming in from our past impressions in our mind, but they leave a person who is realized completely undisturbed because he's already attained that state of unity. He said, "Eternal peace cannot come so long as passions and desires persist. And those passions and desires cannot be wholly uprooted without the grace of God. As for myself, the Master wiped off all passions and desires from me out of his own mercy. I have none at all. The body continues by his will and for his work alone, for I am none other than the pure, intelligent, free soul. And for this body itself, I often forget that it exists at all, though it is true that the Lord is having so much work done through it. Hence it is that he preserves it. But I myself have no desire. Do you understand that? I am bliss itself, and that is Brahman." With this silent, his countenance seemed to have changed wholly for the time being, as though he were a new man altogether. One felt afraid to even look at him. At long last, he said in a sort of soliloquy, "Mother has granted me all that I may need out of her mercy. She has filled me up fully with all she had in her store. I have nothing else to desire. By her grace, I have everything. Yam ladva chaparam labvam manyate nadikam tataha, getting which one does not think of any other gain to be greater. She alone knows why she still preserves this body." On another occasion also, it was the dead of night. Mahapurushji was seated on his bed, deep in meditation. After a long while, he started opening his eyes at times and then closing them. Just then, a cat entered the room and mewed. He looked in that direction and saluted the cat with folded hands. The attendant nearby could not at first understand that he was saluting the cat. So he looked inquiringly at Mahapurushji, who then explained, "Look here, my boy. The master has now brought me to such a state that I see everything as nothing but consciousness itself. That same consciousness is at play through everything: houses, furniture, beds, bedsteads, and all creatures. The difference is only in names, but there is oneness behind all. I can see that very clearly. So I cannot check that mood, however much I may try. That consciousness shines even through this cat in all its brilliance. This is the mood in which the master now keeps me fully absorbed. Men and women come and go. I talk with them because I have to. I also eat and move about as in common life because I have to. All that proceeds as though out of past habit. But whenever I lift my mind even a little from all those, I come face to face with this play of consciousness everywhere. Names and forms and all such things belong to a very low order of existence. When the mind transcends names and forms, you come to the acme of realization, and then everything is full of bliss. Everything is full of consciousness. Such things cannot be explained through word of mouth. He alone can know who attains that state. He seemed to be in a mood to talk of many things more, but he became silent all of a sudden. The attendant stood stock still, wondering at what he had heard. Mahapurushji used to warn his attendants that it would not do only to be engaged in serving the guru. They would have to undertake spiritual practices as well. And he used to warn them that anyone who had neglected his spiritual practices and spent his time merely in the service of saintly people and living in association with them might often become puffed up with pride and egotism, thinking himself superior to others, just because of these advantages he had over them. So one day at the dead of night, he said to the attendant, "Look here, it is good that you are serving me. It is only out of inestimable mercy of the master that he's been making you serve one of his sons. But mind you, my son, you must carry on spiritual practices along with this. You will understand what the master really was only when you carry out your japa, your meditation, prayer, etc. regularly. You will court failure by thinking of us as mere human beings. Have this fully in mind. To make this idea of divinity fully effective, you have to undertake strenuous spiritual exercises. One is vouchsafed that divine mood when one's mind becomes purified through meditation on God. Though we have seen the Master, though we've lived with him and have been blessed by him, still, what a series of difficult spiritual practices he made us undergo. Could even we ourselves understand in the first instance that he was God and had come down to the world to save it? Could we recognize him as such? Gradually, through spiritual practice and insight, that knowledge has become permanent. That's interesting because this came up last week in one of our questions. I think it was Amrita who asked, did they realize that he was divine? Did they realize he was an avatar from the beginning? It's like he makes it really clear here. No, they didn't. It was only when they had their own sort of, when their minds rose to a higher level through spiritual practice, that they could really see what he was. And so he's telling his attendant, if you just serve me as a human being and you're not doing your spiritual practice, this is not going to serve you. Your ego is just going to get bigger. So you really have to do serious spiritual practice, and do not see any of us, that means disciples of Ramakrishna, as just ordinary human beings. He said gradually, through spiritual practice and insight, that knowledge has become permanent. At the same time, it is true, of course, that nothing has been achieved without his grace, though it is a fact that his grace does descend when one implores him piteously and seeks him earnestly. I have realized by stages that he is God himself, none other than the Lord of all the gods in the whole universe. He has revealed to me his real nature out of his own grace. Undertake japa at the dead of night. If you make your japa at the dead of night, you will have the result very soon, and your whole being will be filled with joy. The bliss will be so deep. Indeed, you will feel no impulse to leave your japa. You have to keep awake at any rate for my service. Sit down during this time for your japa. After all, you have not to work for me all the time. It's only once in a while that I want help. So here is a great opportunity for you. Engage yourself fully in japa. Do you understand that? Don't let your time pass idly, my son. You have to be fully absorbed in calling on him. It won't do to be half-hearted. Whatever you do in this respect, you must do with your whole mind. Only then will you get joy. That's why the Master sang, "Dive deep, my mind, with the name of Kali, into the fathomless water of the sea of your heart, which is the repository of jewels." One seldom derives any joy from a work unless one can become fully engrossed in it. God looks at the heart, at the sincerity of a person. He does not keep count of the time. Besides, when one undertakes japa and meditation regularly, one gets the mind purged of impurities thereby, and that mood becomes fixed in the mind. One has to practice daily and constantly. In the Gita, the Lord declares, the mind can be controlled, O Arjuna, through practice and dispassion. Go on calling on him daily with piteous imploring and tears, and you will find that the power of Brahman, that coiled up energy in you, he's speaking of the Kundalini, will be awakened. The road to the bliss is Brahman. The road to the bliss that is Brahman will be opened. If once that mother, one with Brahman itself, becomes propitious, one has nothing more to worry about. In the Chandi it is said, it is that blissful mother herself who, when favorably disposed, becomes the cause of people's salvation. It is she herself who, having become propitious, grants the boon of freedom to people. She is but ever ready to grant, but who indeed isn't eager to accept. She grants everything, devotion, freedom, and all, but only if one prays earnestly. You left home aspiring to realize God. That's the aim of life, and you must not forget that main purpose. Have the Master installed in your heart through strenuous effort, constant japa and meditation, continuous prayer and remembrance. Then you will be granted pure joy, and you will have great fun. You know what? All bodies have to die, he says. Our bodies too. They're not everlasting, after all. It's already old enough, and it may fall off any day. And then you will see darkness all around. But if through japa and meditation you can see your chosen deity, you will find that the Guru is not different from the deity, that he is seated forever in your heart. He's saying the Guru and Ishta become one. Sri Ramakrishna said that very often. The Guru does not cease to exist even when this gross body is no more. I tell you all this because I love you. My only prayer is that you may be vouchsafed all that is really good. And we'll go into a little section here. He says, Mahapurushi says, now that I am ill, you live near me, serving me day and night. That's good enough. But you will be greatly deluded if you come to think that you alone are serving me and thereby achieving something very great. Do you understand that? Do you think that you do something extraordinary by fetching something for me and nursing this body a little? That's not it. Somebody may be very far away doing the Master's work with all sincerity, and that, too, is service to us. For the Master is the soul of my soul. Even those who live thousands of miles away, working heart and soul for the Master's cause, and have established the Master in their hearts with the help of spiritual practices, they are very dear to me. They are serving me only. I am happy when the Master is happy through service. The whole universe becomes content when he is content. By doing the Master's work, they achieve greater results than by serving their Guru. In the morning, when most of the inmates of the monastery had left after making their obeisance to Mahapurushji, a monk told him of the restlessness of his mind and the consequent dejection that he was experiencing. His imploring moved Mahapurushji, who said, "Why should you be afraid, my son? Continue at his door, taking shelter with him. He never disappoints a supplicant." "All my time has been spent in vain," moaned the monk. "I've not yet seen God. I haven't got peace of mind. At times, complete loss of faith assails the mind. I begin to doubt even the invaluable instruction I receive from you and from others." This made Mahapurushji's face turn red. With great warmth, he said, "Look here, my son. If the master is true, we too are true. Whatever I say is nothing but the truth. We have not come to cheat people. If we sink, you too will sink with us. But by his grace, we have realized that we shall never sink, nor will you." As Mahapurushji remained confined to his room, an attendant had the duty of keeping him informed of everything concerning the monastery, after personally moving about the precincts and inquiring about the health of the inmates, the cattle, and other matters of importance. I love that the cattle were right there at the top with the matters of importance. Mahapurushji used to receive his reports in the afternoon. One day, when the attendant came to him with his report, he found it seated alone in a very grave mood. His eyes were half closed, as though it was an effort to keep them open to see the outer world. Even though the attendant stood in front of him, he did not make the usual inquiry. It seemed as if he was not aware of his presence. Noticing him in such an abstract mood, the attendant moved aside. After a long interval had passed thus, when Mahapurushji began casting his look around, the attendant moved in front of him and began giving the report as usual. Then Mahapurushji said, "Look here. This world has no existence for me. Brahman alone exists. It is only for the sake of keeping the mind down on the normal plane that I talk and inquire about things." With this, he resumed his former mood and did not care to hear the report that day. One day he told us of a vision he had about Swamiji, Swami Vivekananda, when living with the master at Kasipur Garden House. Well, a very strange phenomenon occurred while living with Swamiji at the garden house, he said. In those days, we all slept together side by side in a room downstairs, for we had not enough bedding worth mentioning. We had a big mosquito curtain which we put up, and we all took shelter under it. One night I slept near Swamiji. There was Shashi Maharaj, that's Swami Ramakrishnananda, and some others as well. Suddenly I woke up to find inside the whole curtain flooded with a brilliant light. Swamiji had been by my side. Now I could not find him there. Instead, there slept a number of Shivas, all of the age of 7 or 8 years old, without clothes and white in color, with their heads covered with matted hair. It was the light emanating from their bodies that lit up the place. As I looked on, I was dumbfounded at the sight. I could not understand anything at first. I thought it was a hallucination. So I rubbed my eyes and again looked at it, and there slept Shivas. Sure enough, just as before. So I was in a fix and sat up with wonder. I did not lie down again. Besides, I was afraid that I might touch them with my feet unconsciously during my sleep. So I spent the whole night in meditation. When the day dawned, I found Swamiji sleeping just as before. When I told him everything, he laughed heartily. Long afterwards, while reading a hymn to Vireshwara Shiva, I discovered a mantra about meditation on him that contained a description just like that. And then I knew that my vision was quite true. Swamiji was nothing but that in reality. He was born as a part of that Shiva, and that's why I saw him like that. It's really hard to fathom, isn't it? It's really hard to fathom. You just got to go, wow. Wow, Om Namah Shivaya, wow. Mahaprabhuji's health was declining steadily. He could not even move about in his room upstairs, let alone walk in the monastery grounds. While walking about upstairs, he needed someone's help. At that time, he said one day, "As the activity outside diminishes, the activity inside increases. For the mind of supreme bliss is nowhere else but within. For the present, it will go on like that, and that's how the Master has ordained." Often he would sing, "The path of death is obliterated, my mental doubts are gone," etc. Now and then, he would also talk about visions, etc. It was just evening one day. The evening services in the shrine had not yet commenced, and the lamps had only just been lighted in the rooms. Mahaprabhuji had been sitting quietly in his room, facing the Master. Suddenly he said, "Quick, give me some holy ashes brought from Vishwanath," that's the big temple in Varanasi, "and spread a silken sheet on my bed. For here is the Master, and here also is Mahadeva." That is, both Shiva and Sri Ramakrishna have come. Saying this, he entered deep meditation, which lasted long into the night. On another afternoon, he said, "Swamiji and Maharaj came just now, and they said, 'Come along, Brother Tarak, come along.'" That's Mahaprabhu Maharaj. He said, "Did you not see them? They were standing just in front." Some inscrutable meaning underlies even the smallest actions and utterances of the saints who have realized the self. When ordinary mortals judge their actions by their own standards and arrive at some conclusion on that basis, more often than not, it's incorrect. But from about the year 1912 onward, when Mahaprabhuji had an attack of dysentery, he had been very strict about his diet. His lunch consisted of some rice, ordinary vegetable soup, and boiled vegetable. Swami Sardananda called the soup Mahaprabhu's soup, humorously. The night meal was equally simple and small in quantity. For a whole year before he was attacked with paralysis in 1933, which is when he had a massive stroke, he would be asking his attendants for some special kinds of food. And this created a surprise in the minds of the inmates of the monastery. This seemed all the more odd when the doctor wanted him to live mostly on a liquid diet. One morning he said, after a long silence, that he felt a hankering for a particular fish of which the Master had spoken. As the dish was rather rare, it was obtained with some difficulty from the other side of the Ganga from a Calcutta market. After tasting just a little bit, he remarked with a slight smile, "The desire came, so I tasted a little. The Master used to say that one should finish one's petty desires by actual experience." And then he added with a hearty laugh, "Who indeed knows, my boy, that he will not have to be reborn again so as to fulfill a petty desire?" Just a few days before his paralytic stroke, he expressed a desire for a ripe mango. Mangoes of a good variety had not come to the market even then, so after a long search in Calcutta, a few mangoes were brought for him. He sent all the mangoes except one for offering to the Master. Then he ordered the attendant to squeeze out the juice of the remaining one and give it to him at mealtime. He was then suffering from asthma, and the attendants were very apprehensive of the bad effect the mango juice would have on his health. So after great deliberation, the chief attendant made bold to remind him of the warning of the doctor. But in spite of the request to the contrary, Mahaprabhuji said with some determination, "I say I will have it." However, when the mango juice was offered to him, he just tasted by dipping his finger into the juice and remarked, "Here, I've tasted it. I had a desire to taste mango juice, so I put a little bit in the mouth. Do you think I eat out of greediness? How can anybody else understand why I ask for diverse things to eat?" Then he said with some warmth, "He comes to caution me about food. You know, I can leave this body this moment if I will. What to talk of this petty food? Was it for nothing that Swamiji gave me the name Mahapurusha, which means great soul? He's indeed a great soul. That's Swamiji said that about him, and thus gave him the name Maha, which means Mahapurusha. In this vein, he talked of many things that day. For the whole day, he remained in a high and a serious mood. It seemed as though his mind had been roaming in another world. And I'm looking at, does anyone right now have any question or something they'd like to bring up? I'd love to hear more about those little Shivas there. Wish I'd... Devi Pran, I know you've probably studied this a little more. You're muted, Devi Prana.
Wonderful about the little Shivas. It's so incredible.
Do you remember hearing anything more about that? Did Swami Asheshananda ever talk about that?
No, he never talked about that, yeah. But he had met, of course, Mahapurush Maharaj.
Yeah.
And just felt that he was a very great soul.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. I remember Swami Shraddhanandaji talked about him a lot, and Lokeshwaranandaji, but none of them ever mentioned that. So I'd love to hear more about that. I've heard from reading Swamiji's life about that, but I'd sure like to have a little more information about exactly what verse that comes from.
Yeah, be interesting to find out.
Yeah, we'll track it down. Okay.
Good.
Any other discussion or things that we'd like to talk about? Anything, Leanne, apart from that Mahapurush kitty that you've got right there?
The kitty, yeah.
I see John coming in.
It's not a question, but the thing about japa in the middle of the night reminds me very much of Daniel Matt and Zohar.
Yes, with it ties in with the Jewish mystical tradition in Zohar. Yeah, very much a disciple, a very beloved disciple of Mahapurush Maharaj that Devi Pran and Border Pran and I were very lucky to meet in Hardwar. Opened up his little container where he kept his japa mala, and inside was a picture of Mahapurushji. And he said to me, when you get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, do not go back to bed. Stay up and do your japa. And I went, I don't get up to go to the bathroom. And he just looked at me totally stunned. It was like, in my old age, of course, that has changed. But I remember him saying that, and of course he got it directly from Mahapurush Maharaj. That was, do you remember his name, Devi Prana? I can see his little face right in front of me.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, to do meditation in the dead of night. The problem is with some of us is that we're totally unconscious in the dead of night. So the best to use the mind when the mind is available. But it's a good goal. You know, Swami Swahananda would wake up in the middle of the night, and he was also at that state of his life where he wouldn't go back to sleep for a long time. So he would spend several hours at night doing japa for the welfare of his disciples.
That's wonderful.
He said, they'll never be able to do all this. So he would sit on the edge of his bed and do his japa for the benefit of everybody, and especially for those who had taken refuge in him, for his disciples. It was really very inspiring, and he never talked about it. Never talked about it. But there he was at night. We heard it from his attendants, and they said, what are you doing? That's what I'm doing. Okay, well then, we shall conclude with a chant. I won't do Brahmar Pranam. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu. Hope you all are okay, well, strong, happy, good shape. Yes. Okay, well, yes, please come back and join us. We're happy to have Swami Chid Brahmananda coming. This Saturday, there will be a gospel reading at 5 p.m., and I bet we can break Swami Chid Brahmananda's arm to do that reading. And there will also be on his talk will be on aspects of attention. And I'm so glad I'm not doing choir and giant. He has to figure out a song that is relevant to that topic. Aspects of attention. And I'm sure it'll be very interesting. And next Wednesday, of course, we'll have more of Mahapurush Maharaj. We're getting very close to the end of the book.